Do you believe that someone who has it all, strength, power, intellect, could ever have a weakness? It's easy to think of the world's strongest, smartest, and most invincible figures as impenetrable, untouchable, and free from the vulnerabilities that everyone else deals with. But what if I told you that even the most superhuman among us have a flaw, a hidden chink in the armor that, when exposed, can turn everything upside down? And what if this weakness, once revealed, could make even the most powerful person in the world vulnerable? Stick around, because by the end of this video, you're going to get the answer to a question you never even realized you were asking. A question that will leave you rethinking everything you thought you knew about strength, resilience, and vulnerability. It's a journey of discovery, and trust me, it's going to be a ride you won't want to miss. Now, I know you didn't click on this video just out of curiosity. You clicked because there's something deep inside you that wants to know what could possibly be the weakness of someone who seems invincible, someone who can handle anything, every challenge, every obstacle without breaking a sweat. What's the secret that could bring them to their knees? You're not alone in that thought. We all admire strength. We all crave invincibility. But we're also deeply curious about what lies beneath the surface. The hidden flaw, the crack in the foundation, the soft spot that no one saw coming. And that's exactly what we're going to dive into today. I'm going to share with you the story of someone who seemed unstoppable, the kind of person who inspired awe, commanded respect, and made everyone around him feel like nothing could ever touch them, until one moment, one action, one revelation shattered it all. This is not just another superhero story. It's not about capes or powers that defy gravity. This is about human nature, and how even the strongest among us can have that one thing, that one weakness, that, when exposed, changes everything. The question that keeps running through your mind is, what could it be? And let me tell you, you won't believe it when you find out. It's something so ordinary, so simple, yet so profoundly human, that it'll make you question what true strength really is. So, why do we hide our weaknesses? Why do we go to such great lengths to make sure no one sees them? The answer might surprise you, and it's something I'm about to reveal. But first, let's talk about our protagonist, the superhuman who's been living among us, pretending to be just like everyone else. Now, you might think that being invulnerable means never showing fear, never showing doubt, and always having the perfect solution to every problem. But this person, they've lived a life of calculated perfection. Every move, every decision, every word, they've been in control. They've built a life around their strength, around their abilities. No one suspects that there's a hidden weakness, because everything looks flawless on the surface. But beneath that exterior, there's a quiet battle going on, a battle that, when exposed, will change everything. Here's the thing, we all have weaknesses. No matter how powerful, how successful, or how perfect our lives might appear on the outside, there's always something we're hiding, something we protect at all costs. Maybe it's fear, maybe it's insecurity, maybe it's a past mistake or regret that we hope no one ever finds out. But the truth is, we all have that one thing that, if it were to be revealed, could bring us to our knees. And the superhuman in this story, well, they're no different. It's just that no one, not even the people closest to them, saw it coming. No one knew that this one small weakness was lurking beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to be exposed. So why does this matter to you? Because the story I'm about to tell you isn't just about one person's fall from grace. It's about all of us. It's about the things we hide, the vulnerabilities we bury, and the fear of what might happen if someone finally sees them. It's about what happens when we confront our own weaknesses and how it can change us forever. And as much as this might seem like a tale about one person's vulnerability, I want you to think about your own life. Where are you hiding? What are you protecting from the world? Because by the end of this video, you'll see how one small revelation can shake everything to its core, and you'll start to ask yourself, what's my weakness, and how far would I go to keep it hidden? As we dive deeper into the story, keep in mind that nothing is what it seems. Our protagonist's weakness is not just a physical flaw. It's not something that can be fixed with a quick solution. No, this is far more psychological. It's something that's been built into their identity for so long that they can't even see it themselves. It's been there all along, lurking in the background, waiting for the right trigger to set it off. And once it's exposed, everything changes. The strength they relied on becomes their biggest liability. The thing they thought would protect them, their greatest asset, becomes the very thing that makes them vulnerable. And that's where the story really begins. Now, I'm not going to give everything away just yet. If I did, what would be the point of watching the rest of the video? But I will tell you this. There's more to this story than just one person's downfall. There's a deeper lesson here about strength, vulnerability, and what it means to be truly human. You're going to see how this one moment of weakness unravels everything they built and how it forces them to face the one thing they've been running from their entire life. And let me tell you, this revelation will shock you. It's not what you expect. It's not a twist that you can predict. It's something entirely different. So, here's the cliffhanger that will keep you hooked. What is the superhuman's weakness? What is it that brings them to their knees? What do they do when the very thing they've been using as armor becomes the weapon that destroys them? Stick around, because the answer is coming, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. The tension in the air was thick, heavy like a storm ready to burst. And as the scene unfolded, it became clear that everything the superhuman had built, everything they'd come to rely on, was now on the verge of collapse. For years, they had been the epitome of strength, the person everyone turned to for solutions, the one who always seemed to know what to do, how to act, how to solve the impossible. But now, that very strength, that sense of invincibility they had so carefully crafted, was slipping through their fingers like sand. And it all started with a single moment, a crack in the foundation so small that no one could have seen it coming. It was almost like the universe itself had decided that it was time for this unshakable figure to face their greatest fear, vulnerability. To truly understand what was happening, it's important to take a step back and look at the life of this individual, this superhuman, who had managed to hide their weakness from the world for so long. From an early age, they had been taught to never show weakness. Their upbringing had been shaped by the belief that strength was the only currency worth having, and anything less was a sign of failure. They were raised in an environment where the stakes were high, where every action had consequences, and every mistake could lead to ruin. The pressure was constant, the expectations relentless. But it was precisely in this kind of environment that they had learned to thrive. They became a master of strategy, a quick thinker, someone who could navigate even the most difficult situations with ease. They were respected by their peers, admired by those around them, and feared by their enemies. But the truth was, no one really knew them. No one knew what lay beneath that cold, calculating exterior. And perhaps that was a problem all along. As a child, they had been a prodigy. Talented, sharp, and fiercely independent. They had always been the one to lead the pack, whether in academics, sports, or social situations. But the further they pushed themselves, the more isolated they became. They learned early on that the only way to truly succeed was to rely on their own strength, to trust no one else. They built walls around themselves, created a persona that was perfect in every way. And for a time, it worked. No one questioned their abilities. No one dared to challenge them. But somewhere along the way, that perfection began to take a toll. The walls they had built to protect themselves became the very prison that kept them trapped. And now, those walls were starting to crumble. The first crack appeared unexpectedly, in the most mundane of situations. It wasn't a physical threat, nor a mental breakdown. It was something much more subtle, a fleeting moment of doubt, a question that had never crossed their mind before. What if they weren't invincible? What if their carefully crafted image of perfection was just that? An image. It was a thought that lingered, creeping into their consciousness in the quietest of moments. And once that seed of doubt was planted, it began to grow. Every decision they made, every action they took, was now clouded by the question, what if this is a moment it all falls apart? At first, they tried to ignore it, to push the thought away and continue as if nothing had changed. They threw themselves back into their work, into their responsibilities, convinced that they could outrun the doubt. But the harder they tried to suppress it, the louder it became. It wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was a reality they couldn't escape. Their vulnerability had been exposed. It was only a matter of time before the world would see it too. The thought gnawed at them, eating away at their sense of control, making them question everything they had ever believed about themselves. As this internal struggle unfolded, the world around them remained blissfully unaware of the impending collapse. Their colleagues, friends, and even their family continued to see them as the strong, reliable person they had always been. But behind closed doors, the superhuman was falling apart. The walls they had built to keep others out were now the very thing keeping them from finding peace. They had pushed people away for so long that they no longer knew how to ask for help, how to let others in. And as the pressure mounted, they began to wonder if it was too late to change. Could they fix what had been broken, or was it too far gone? It wasn't long before their vulnerabilities started to manifest in subtle ways. They began making mistakes, something they had always been able to avoid with ease. The perfect, calculated decisions they had once made now seemed hasty, reckless even. They found themselves second-guessing their every move, afraid of making the wrong choice, afraid of being seen as weak. And with each mistake, the walls they had so carefully constructed began to crack even further. Their once immovable confidence was now a shadow of its former self, and the doubt only grew stronger. But there was one thing they hadn't anticipated. The people closest to them began to notice. At first, it was small things, a slip-up in a meeting, a rare moment of indecision. But over time, these moments became harder to ignore. Those who had once relied on the superhuman's unshakable resolve began to question whether they were truly as invincible as they had seemed. Rumors started to spread, whispers of weakness, of cracks in the armor, and with those whispers came a growing sense of uncertainty. The superhuman, who had always been the one to inspire confidence in others, was now the one in need of reassurance. It wasn't just the people around them who began to notice the change. The superhuman themselves could feel it too. The once unshakable confidence was now replaced with an overwhelming sense of fear. Fear that everything they had built could come crashing down at any moment. The fear of being exposed, of being seen as weak, was consuming them. And the more they tried to control the situation, the more out of control they became. As the days passed, the superhuman's vulnerability became more and more apparent. The cracks in their facade were no longer hidden beneath the surface. They were now visible to everyone who cared to look. And while they had always been able to hide behind their strength, their intellect, their charm, they could no longer escape the truth. They were vulnerable, and in that vulnerability lay their greatest fear. That they might not be able to recover, that the very thing they had spent their entire life building would unravel before their eyes. The pressure was becoming unbearable. And just when it seemed like the superhuman might crack completely, something unexpected happened. A new challenge appeared on the horizon, one that threatened to expose their weaknesses to the world in a way they could never have imagined. It was a threat unlike any they had ever faced before, one that would force them to confront their vulnerability head-on. This new danger wasn't just external. It was a direct challenge to everything they had ever believed about themselves. The superhuman's world was about to be turned upside down, and they were to face their worst fears, or risk losing everything. But what was this new threat? And how would the superhuman respond? That's the mystery we're about to explore. Because the truth is, this story is just getting started. The real test is yet to come, and as the stakes rise, you'll find yourself questioning not just what happens to the superhuman, but what happens to all of us when we face our greatest weaknesses. The tension reached new heights as the superhuman found themselves on the precipice of everything they had worked so hard to build, and yet there was a sense of inevitability in the air. The world around them seemed to close in, the weight of their vulnerability pressing on them in ways they couldn't escape. Every movement, every decision was now measured against the fear of failure. The cracks in their carefully constructed image were becoming more apparent, and despite their best efforts to control the situation, they could feel the walls coming down. The one thing they had never truly understood was the very thing they were now experiencing, the sensation of being exposed. There were no shields left to hide behind, no masks to wear. What was once their greatest strength had now become their greatest weakness, and they were left wondering how long it would take for everything to unravel. And then, as if fate itself was pushing them further into the abyss, the threat they hadn't anticipated reared its ugly head. It wasn't just a singular challenge anymore. It was a cascading series of events, each more terrifying than the last. The superhuman had believed they were prepared for anything. They had faced adversaries, overcome obstacles, and conquered their fair share of difficult situations. But this was different. The first hint of what was to come appeared unexpectedly, in the form of a cryptic message. It was simple, direct, but it carried a weight that immediately set the superhuman on edge. The message was a riddle, one that seemed to speak to their very core, to the heart of their doubts. Your strength is your greatest lie. The one thing you thought could never hurt you is the very thing that will bring you to your knees. It was unsettling, more so because it hinted at something deeper, something that the superhuman had been too afraid to acknowledge. At first, they dismissed it as some kind of sick joke, an attempt to undermine their confidence. But then, strange things started happening. Small things at first, things that could easily be written off as coincidence. Their usual sense of control slipped. They began to notice discrepancies in their surroundings, odd occurrences that didn't make sense. Files went missing, vital pieces of information became corrupted, and key members of their team started acting strangely. It was as though someone or something was orchestrating a campaign to break them down from the inside out. The superhuman tried to ignore it, telling themselves that it was just the pressure getting to them, but deep down, they knew something was wrong. The fear crept back in, slowly but steadily, gnawing at the edges of their mind. The stakes continued to rise as the superhuman found themselves at the center of a conspiracy they couldn't yet understand. Every time they thought they had a handle on things, the situation slipped further from their grasp. They reached out for help, but the few people they trusted seemed to be pulled away by unseen forces. The once strong bonds they had carefully cultivated over the years now felt fragile, as though they could break with a single wrong move. They had built their entire life around the idea of control, of being the person everyone relied on, the one who could always fix things. But now, for the first time, they were completely and utterly powerless. As the days went by, the superhuman's anxiety began to consume them. They couldn't escape the feeling that they were being watched, that every step they took was being monitored, analyzed, and used against them. It was as though every aspect of their life was being manipulated by forces beyond their comprehension. They tried to confront their fears, to seek answers, but each attempt led them deeper into confusion and despair. It was clear that they were up against something far greater than anything they had ever encountered before. And in the midst of this overwhelming uncertainty, they were forced to confront the one truth they had spent their entire life avoiding. They were vulnerable, and they had no idea how to protect themselves from the forces closing in. The superhuman's mind raced as they tried to piece together the puzzle. Who was behind this? What was their goal? And most importantly, why now? Why had they waited until the superhuman was at their most vulnerable to strike? It didn't make sense. There had to be a connection, a reason behind the timing. And as they sifted through the growing pile of strange occurrences, they stumbled upon a clue that would change everything. It was a name, an obscure reference in one of the missing files. The name wasn't familiar, but the words surrounding it seemed to speak directly to the heart of the mystery. The name was linked to an old organization, one that had long been thought to be defunct. An organization that specialized in manipulating public figures, exploiting their weaknesses for political and financial gain. The superhuman's blood ran cold as they realized the implications of what they had uncovered. This was no ordinary conspiracy. This was a calculated attack, one that had been years in the making, and the superhuman was its primary target. As they dug deeper, the realization hit them like a freight train. The forces arrayed against them weren't just trying to expose their vulnerability. They were trying to destroy everything they had worked for. Their reputation, their influence, their career, all of it was at risk. The superhuman had always been the one in control, the one pulling the strings, but now they were the puppet, and someone else was holding the strings. The twist came in the form of an unexpected revelation. The superhuman's own team, the very people they had trusted, had been compromised. For years, they had relied on their closest allies, their confidants, the ones who had always been there when the going got tough. But now, the superhuman realized that some of them had been working against them from the start. There were whispers of betrayal, hints that some of their most trusted companions had been planted by the organization they were now up against. The shock of this discovery nearly broke them. How could they have been so blind? How had they missed the signs? The betrayal stung more than they could have ever imagined. It was one thing to face an external enemy, but this was personal. It felt like a punch to the gut, a gut-wrenching realization that the people they had once relied on the most had been working against them all along. With this newfound knowledge, the superhumans' world was torn apart even further. The trust they had so carefully cultivated over the years now felt like a cruel joke. How many others had been compromised? How many more betrayals were waiting to be uncovered? The questions kept piling up, each one more urgent than the last. And as they fought to make sense of it all, another unexpected twist took shape. The organization they were up against wasn't just targeting them. They were targeting everyone who had ever trusted them. Their entire support network was being dismantled piece by piece, leaving the superhuman isolated and alone in a way they had never known before. Now, more than ever, the superhuman had to confront the reality of their situation. The stakes were higher than they had ever been, and the consequences of failure were unimaginable. They had no choice but to continue fighting, to search for answers, even as the walls closed in around them. But the deeper they went, the more dangerous the game became. Every step forward seemed to lead them further into the web of deception that had been carefully spun around them. And with each passing moment, the superhuman could feel the grip of their vulnerability tightening. There was no way to know how this would end, but one thing was certain. The stakes were higher than ever before, and the superhuman was about to face the ultimate test of their strength. In the midst of the growing chaos, the superhuman's resolve began to waver. They had spent so long fighting to maintain control, to keep their vulnerabilities hidden. But now, it was impossible to ignore them any longer. They could feel the weight of their past decisions bearing down on them, the realization that their quest for perfection had led them to this moment of reckoning. The person they had once been was no longer the same, and the world around them was quickly changing. The superhuman was standing at the edge of a precipice, and with each passing second, the ground beneath them seemed to shift. The mysterious figure who had entered the game like a shadow on the edges of the superhuman's life now became a focal point of everything they had been fighting. This enigmatic presence, an individual whose name had not yet been uttered but whose influence felt as tangible as a cold wind, had been orchestrating the chaos from the very beginning. The superhuman had sensed that something larger was at play, but until now, they had not realized how deep the web of deception truly ran. The figure was not simply another adversary. They were the puppet master, the one pulling the strings behind all the betrayals, the lies, and the breakdowns of trust. And now, as the superhuman stood on the precipice, facing the storm they had tried so desperately to control, they understood that their greatest challenge was just beginning. The stakes had never been higher. The superhuman was not just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for everything they had ever known, everything they had ever built. The trust, the alliances, the influence. Every aspect of their life was being torn apart, and there was no escape. The betrayal from their own team members had devastated them. The emotional toll had been severe, and yet the fear of losing everything they had worked for seemed to eclipse the pain of being betrayed. But as they stood at the center of this escalating storm, they realized that to truly conquer their vulnerability, they would have to embrace the truth, embrace the very thing that had always eluded them. Control was an illusion. The superhuman was not invincible. They were human, frail and flawed, and in that realization, there was a strange kind of power. It was a moment of clarity, of self-awareness that cut through the fear and doubt. They had spent so long striving to be perfect, to shield themselves from every possible weakness. But the truth was that perfection was the very thing that made them vulnerable. The more they fought against their flaws, the more they invited failure. But now, in the face of insurmountable odds, they understood that the key to their survival, perhaps even to their victory, was not to fight against their vulnerability, but to embrace it, to turn it into their greatest strength. The superhuman was no longer going to be bound by the shackles of their own perfectionism. They would fight, yes, but they would fight with everything they were, flaws and all. The mysterious figure finally revealed themselves. They were someone from the superhuman's past, a face they had once trusted but had long since forgotten. This was no random player. This was someone who had been in the shadows, watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The figure had always been there, a part of the superhuman's history, but they had never been truly seen. They were the mirror, the reflection of the superhuman's darker side, the part of themselves that they had denied, suppressed, and feared. And now, the figure was back, stronger than ever, to push the superhuman to the edge, to force him to confront everything they had been running from. The fight was not just for survival. It was for identity, for a chance to redefine everything they had once believed about themselves. But even as the superhuman prepared to face this final challenge, something unexpected happened. The team they had thought was lost, the team they had feared had turned against them, rallied together in a moment of unity. The same people who had betrayed them were now standing by their side. It was a surprising turn of events, one that left the superhuman questioning everything they had believed about loyalty, trust, and the human capacity for change. The truth, they realized, was not as simple as it seemed. People were not defined by a single action, a single betrayal. People could change. And in this moment, their team was showing that change was possible. They were not just fighting for their own survival now. They were fighting for something greater, for a future which they could all move forward together as one. The final confrontation was unlike anything the superhuman had ever imagined. It wasn't just a battle of physical strength or strategic cunning. It was a battle of wills, of hearts, and of the very essence of who they were. The mysterious figure, their former ally turned adversary, was relentless in their pursuit of victory. But the superhuman, now fully aware of their own vulnerability, fought with a strength that came not from their powers, but from their heart. The fight was grueling, and for a moment, it seemed as if all would be lost. The figure had the upper hand, controlling the battlefield with ease, manipulating every move the superhuman made. But just when it seemed like defeat was inevitable, the superhuman found the one thing they needed to turn the tide: the truth. In a moment of pure clarity, the superhuman realized that the key to defeating their adversary wasn't in overpowering them, but in outsmarting them. The mysterious figure had spent their entire life manipulating others, playing the long game, thinking that they could control every aspect of their world. But they had underestimated one thing: the superhuman ability to change, to adapt, to embrace the very things that made them vulnerable. And in that moment, the superhuman used their greatest weakness, their vulnerability, to dismantle the figure's entire plan. With the final blow struck, the battle ended. The superhuman stood victorious, but not in the way they had expected. They had not triumphed through strength or brute force. They had triumphed through self-awareness, through accepting their flaws, through embracing the very thing that had once seemed like their greatest downfall. And as the dust settled, the superhuman looked around at their team, at the people who had fought beside them, and realized that they had won not because they were invincible, but because they were human. In that humbling realization, they found the strength to rebuild, to forge a new path forward, one that was grounded in the truth of who they were, imperfections and all. The final twist, however, left everyone breathless. As the superhuman stood victorious, the mysterious figure, now revealed as their closest confidant, looked them in the eye and spoke one final cryptic message: "You think you've won, but this is just the beginning." And with those words, the figure disappeared into shadows, leaving the superhuman with a lingering sense of unease. The victory was theirs, but the war was far from over. As the superhuman began to rebuild, stronger and wiser than before, they knew that they had faced their darkest fears and emerged victorious. But they also understood that this was not the end. There would always be new challenges, new threats, new moments of vulnerability to face. And with each new challenge, they would grow stronger, more resilient, more aware of their own worth. The journey was far from over, but one thing was certain: the superhuman would never again allow their vulnerability to be their downfall. They had learned that true strength came from within, from accepting who they were, flaws and all. And so, the superhuman moved forward, not as a perfect being, but as someone who had embraced their imperfections, their humanity. The battle may have been won, but the story of resilience, strength, and self-discovery was just beginning. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of inner strength and resilience. Until next time, stay strong, stay brave, and never forget your worth.